Welcome to this exploration of shadow integration, where the psychological insights of Carl Jung meet the wisdom of Stoic philosophy. Today we delve into a transformative journey, one that many of us unknowingly embark upon as we navigate the complexities of human consciousness. The shadow, as Jung defined it, represents the aspects of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or hidden away. It's a collection of traits, impulses, and potentials that we've deemed unacceptable, either through societal conditioning or personal judgment. Yet in this rejection lies the root of much psychological suffering and energy depletion. The ancient Stoics, though using different terminology, understood this dynamic well. Their philosophy encouraged facing reality as it truly is, including the full spectrum of human nature. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This perspective aligns remarkably with Jung's approach to the shadow, suggesting that the very aspects of ourselves we resist hold the keys to our wholeness. When our shadow dominates, we live reactively, projecting, defending, and exhausting ourselves through unconscious patterns. But when integration begins, profound shifts occur. Energy previously spent on suppression becomes available for growth and authenticity. This script explores the unmistakable signs that this integration is taking place, that your shadow no longer dominates your energy. Let us journey together through these signs, weaving Jungian psychology with Stoic wisdom, to understand how shadow work ultimately leads to a more harmonious existence. The nature of the shadow. Before exploring the signs of shadow integration, we must understand what we're integrating. Jung described the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be, yet it remains an inescapable part of our psychological makeup. The shadow forms early in life as we learn which aspects of ourselves win approval and which bring rejection. A child quickly discovers that certain emotions, thoughts, or behaviors result in disconnection or punishment. Through this conditioning, parts of the self become relegated to the unconscious, not eliminated, but hidden from conscious awareness. This unconscious material doesn't disappear. Rather, it operates beneath the surface, influencing our perceptions, reactions, and relationships in ways we rarely recognize. When triggered, the shadow can hijack our rational mind, causing disproportionate reactions, projection onto others, or self-sabotaging behaviors. The Stoics recognized a similar dynamic. Epictetus noted, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Our presumed self-knowledge often excludes the shadow aspects we've disowned, creating blind spots in our understanding. Seneca observed, "We are mad not only individually, but nationally. We check manslaughter and isolated murders, but what of war and the much-vaunted crime of slaughtering whole nations?" Here he points to our collective shadow, the capacity for destruction we deny while claiming civility. The shadow contains not only our darkest impulses, but also our undeveloped potential, talents, strengths, and qualities we've buried out of fear or conformity. This is why shadow work isn't merely about confronting our demons. It's about reclaiming our wholeness, including gifts we've denied ourselves. Jung stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Similarly, the Stoic practice of negative visualization, deliberately contemplating worst-case scenarios, acknowledges that avoiding difficult truths doesn't eliminate them. It only increases their power over us. When our shadow dominates, we live in a state of energy-draining internal conflict. We exhaust ourselves maintaining psychological barriers between our conscious identity and disowned aspects. This fragmentation diminishes our vitality and authenticity. Sign 1. Decreased reactivity to triggers. One of the earliest and most noticeable signs that your shadow no longer dominates your energy is a marked decrease in emotional reactivity. Situations, comments, or people that once provoked intense defensive responses now create only minor ripples in your emotional state. When the shadow rules, triggers activate unconscious material with overwhelming intensity. A casual remark that hints at a disowned quality might spark rage, shame, or anxiety far beyond what the situation warrants. This disproportionate reaction occurs because the threat is not to your conscious self, but to the carefully constructed persona that keeps your shadow contained. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The Stoics expressed a similar insight. Epictetus advised, "When anyone provokes you, be assured that it is your own opinion which provokes you." Both traditions recognize that intense reactions reveal internal conflicts rather than external truths. As shadow integration progresses, this dynamic changes fundamentally. You begin to recognize triggers as they arise, creating space between stimulus and response. This space allows consciousness to intervene before the unconscious reaction takes over. Imagine someone criticizes your work. Previously, this might have activated shadow material around unworthiness or failure, triggering defensive anger or collapse. Post-integration, you can acknowledge the discomfort without being consumed by it. You might think this feedback stings because excellence matters to me, rather than, "This proves I'm fundamentally flawed." Marcus Aurelius offered practical wisdom for this process. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. This revocation becomes possible as shadow integration advances. The decrease in reactivity creates a profound energy shift. The psychological resources previously dedicated to defending against triggers become available for creative and constructive purposes. You'll notice this as increased mental clarity, emotional stability, and physical vitality. This sign manifests in daily life as responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively, recovering more quickly from emotional disturbances, maintaining perspective during conflicts, experiencing curiosity about your triggers rather than being overwhelmed by them, finding it easier to hear criticism without defensive deflection. This decreased reactivity doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or detached. Rather, it signifies emotional maturity, the ability to experience feelings fully without being controlled by them. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Sign 2. Recognition without identification. A profound shift occurs when you can recognize shadow elements within yourself without fully identifying with them. This represents a significant evolution in consciousness. The ability to observe your psychological patterns with detachment and compassion. Before shadow integration, people typically oscillate between two extremes: complete denial of shadow aspects, "I would never be jealous/angry/selfish," or complete identification with them when triggered, "I am a terrible person for having these thoughts." Neither stance allows for true integration. Jung described this middle path. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When your shadow no longer dominates, you develop the capacity to say, "I notice jealousy arising in me," rather than, "I am not a jealous person," denial, or "I am consumed by jealousy," identification. This subtle distinction creates psychological freedom. The emotion or impulse is acknowledged as an experience passing through consciousness, not as your fundamental identity. The Stoics cultivated this observational stance through practices like premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, and the discipline of assent, choosing how to relate to impressions rather than automatically believing or acting on them. Epictetus taught, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be.'" This recognition without identification manifests as the ability to name your emotions and impulses without shame, decrease self-judgment when shadow material arises, humor and lightness about your psychological patterns, willingness to discuss formerly taboo aspects of yourself, reduced need to present a perfect image to others. A practical example: someone who has integrated shadow elements around anger might notice, "I'm feeling angry right now. That's interesting. I wonder what boundary of mine feels violated," rather than suppressing the anger or exploding with it. They recognize the emotion without becoming it. This capacity dramatically reduces internal conflict. Energy previously spent on suppression or acting out becomes available for conscious choice. The person can decide how to channel the emotional energy constructively rather than being driven by it unconsciously. Seneca advised, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This remedy becomes accessible once you can recognize without identifying, creating the crucial space between impulse and action where wisdom can operate. Sign 3. Projection withdrawal. Projection, the unconscious attribution of our disowned qualities onto others, consumes enormous psychological energy. A clear sign of shadow integration is the increasing ability to withdraw these projections and own the qualities you once could only see in others. Jung defined projection as an unconscious transfer. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor, and we treat him accordingly. This mechanism protects the ego from confronting rejected aspects of the self, but distorts our perception of reality and damages relationships. When someone triggers intense admiration or aversion beyond what the situation warrants, projection is likely at work. The qualities that evoke these strong reactions, whether positive or negative, often represent disowned parts of ourselves. The Stoics recognized how our judgments about others reveal our internal state. Marcus Aurelius counseled, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil." He then reminds himself that he too has these qualities, which allows him to approach others with understanding rather than judgment. As shadow integration progresses, you'll notice decreased tendency to make sweeping judgments about others' character, recognition of your own traits in people who trigger strong reactions, the ability to ask, "What might this person be reflecting back to me?" Less energy spent on criticism, gossip, or idealization of others. More authentic connections based on seeing others as they are, not as projections. Consider someone who has disowned their ambition due to family conditioning that labeled it as selfish. Before integration, they might frequently criticize overly ambitious colleagues with disproportionate intensity. As integration occurs, they might realize, my reaction to Jamie's promotion announcement reveals my own suppressed desire for advancement. This insight allows them to reclaim their healthy ambition while seeing Jamie more clearly. Epictetus offered, "When any person treats you ill or speaks ill of you, remember that he does this or says this because he thinks it is his duty. Say to yourself, it seems so to him." This perspective becomes more accessible as projections withdraw, allowing you to separate others' behavior from your psychological material. The energy liberated through projection withdrawal is substantial. Relationships become less charged with unconscious material, creating space for genuine connection. Internal conflicts diminish as you reclaim and integrate the qualities previously projected outward. Sign 4. Embracing paradox and complexity. A sophisticated indicator of shadow integration is an increasing comfort with paradox, ambiguity, and psychological complexity. When the shadow no longer dominates, rigid either slash or thinking gives way to both slash and awareness, the capacity to hold seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously. The unintegrated shadow creates psychological splitting, dividing the world into good slash bad, right slash wrong, worthy slash unworthy with little room for nuance. This splitting serves a defensive function, keeping threatening shadow material at bay through oversimplification. Jung observed that psychological maturity requires transcending these binaries. The larger the area of light, the larger the periphery of darkness. Integration involves expanding consciousness to include what previously seemed irreconcilable. As the shadow integrates, you develop the capacity to acknowledge that you can be both strong and vulnerable. You can love someone and be frustrated with them simultaneously. You can have both selfish and altruistic motivations. You can recognize your skills while acknowledging areas for growth. You can hold firm boundaries with compassion. The Stoics cultivated this complexity in their understanding of human nature. Seneca wrote, "It is in no man's power to have whatever he wants, but he has it in his power not to wish for what he hasn't got and cheerfully make the most of the things that do come his way." This perspective embraces the paradox of acceptance and effort, working diligently while releasing attachment to outcomes. This embrace of complexity manifests as decreased need for absolute certainty or moral purity. Greater tolerance for ambiguity in yourself and others. The ability to see multiple perspectives in conflicts. Less rigid ideological thinking. More nuanced emotional responses that contain seemingly opposite feelings. Consider someone who has integrated shadow elements around achievement. Rather than oscillating between relentless perfectionism and defeatist inaction, they can pursue excellence while accepting imperfection. They recognize both their drive to succeed and their need for rest without condemning either impulse. Marcus Aurelius articulated this integration. Love the humble art you have learned, and take rest in it. Pass through the remainder of your days as one who wholeheartedly entrusts all possessions to the gods, making yourself neither a tyrant nor a slave to any human being. The energy freed through embracing paradox is substantial. Mental resources previously consumed by maintaining rigid positions become available for creative thinking and authentic expression. The exhausting effort to maintain psychological consistency relaxes, allowing a more flowing and adaptive engagement with life. Sign 5. Authentic expression of the full self. Perhaps the most visible sign of shadow integration is the emergence of authentic self-expression that incorporates formerly disowned aspects. This authenticity manifests as congruence between inner experience and outer expression, what Jung might call individuation and what the Stoics approached as virtue. When the shadow dominates, aspects of ourselves remain unexpressed or emerge in distorted, unconscious ways. We present a carefully curated version of ourselves while suppressing traits deemed unacceptable. This fragmentation creates a persistent sense of inauthenticity and requires constant vigilance to maintain. Epictetus advised, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." This direct alignment between identity and action becomes increasingly possible as shadow integration progresses. Jung believed individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires reclaiming shadow aspects. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This doesn't mean indulging every impulse, but consciously incorporating all aspects of the self into a coherent whole. Signs of this authentic expression include decreased concern with others' approval, willingness to express unpopular opinions when necessary, comfort with showing vulnerability alongside strength, natural expression of qualities previously judged as unacceptable, greater spontaneity and playfulness, more consistency across different social contexts. Consider someone who integrated shadow aspects around assertiveness. Previously, they might have swung between passive silence and rare explosive outbursts. Post-integration, they express boundaries and needs clearly without drama or apology. This authenticity feels liberating both to themselves and often to those around them, who no longer have to navigate unspoken resentments. Marcus Aurelius counseled self-congruence. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. This simple directive becomes more accessible as shadow integration allows us to recognize and take responsibility for our full selves. The energy transformation here is profound. Resources previously dedicated to maintaining a facade become available for creative self-expression. The exhaustion of pretense gives way to the natural vitality of authenticity. As Jung noted, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This authenticity doesn't mean becoming self-centered or inconsiderate. Rather, it allows for truer connection and contribution. When no longer dominated by the shadow, we can be present with others without the distortion of projection or the barriers of persona. Sign 6. Transmutation of shadow energy. A powerful indicator of shadow integration is the ability to channel formerly destructive energies into constructive expressions. This alchemical process transforms shadow aspects without denying their power or suppressing their essence. Jung used alchemical metaphors extensively, seeing in them parallels to psychological transformation. The lead of the shadow isn't eliminated, but transmuted into psychological gold. The same energy redirected toward conscious purposes. When shadow dominates, primal energies like anger, sexuality, ambition, or self-preservation often express themselves in destructive or unconscious ways. Integration doesn't mean eliminating these energies, but redirecting them. The Stoics understood this principle of channeling rather than suppressing vital forces. Seneca advised, "The wise man will not be angry with wrongdoers." Why not? Because he knows that wisdom is not born but developed through training. This suggests transmuting the energy of righteous indignation into determined wisdom. Examples of this transmutation include anger becoming passionate advocacy for justice, competitiveness becoming excellence in service of others, sexual energy becoming creative expression, fear becoming prudent preparation, pride becoming dignity and self-respect. Consider someone who has integrated shadow aspects around power. Previously, they might have swung between domineering behavior and self-effacement. Post-integration, they channel their natural authority into leadership that empowers others, neither abusing power nor denying their capacity for influence. Epictetus taught, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." This reflects the transmutation process, taking raw psychological material and directing it toward constructive ends while accepting what cannot be changed. This transmutation creates an enormous energy shift. Power previously lost to internal conflict becomes available for purposeful action. The exhaustion of resistance gives way to the vitality of channeled expression. Marcus Aurelius described this process. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The very qualities that once seemed obstacles become resources when integrated consciously. Sign 7. Reconciliation with the personal past. A profound sign of shadow integration is making peace with your personal history, particularly with experiences that shaped your shadow formation. This reconciliation doesn't require forgetting or minimizing past difficulties, but involves finding meaning and accepting their role in your development. Jung believed that personal history carries tremendous psychological power. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Much of what we consider destiny or recurring patterns stems from unintegrated shadow material formed through early experiences. The Stoics similarly emphasized coming to terms with one's past. Epictetus taught, "Don't seek to have events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." This radical acceptance applies not only to present circumstances, but to one's personal history. Signs of this reconciliation include decreased resentment toward those who contributed to shadow formation, ability to discuss painful memories without being overwhelmed, recognition of how difficulties shape strengths, less tendency to blame past circumstances for current challenges, integration of childhood experiences into a coherent life narrative. Consider someone reconciling with a critical parent who contributed to shadow formation around self-worth. Rather than remaining trapped in resentment or denial, they might acknowledge, "My father's criticism was harmful, and it helped me develop resilience. I can honor my pain while recognizing how it shaped me without defining me." Marcus Aurelius counseled such reconciliation. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together. But do so with all your heart. This includes making peace with the circumstances and relationships that formed your shadow. The energy liberation through this reconciliation is substantial. Psychological resources previously consumed by unresolved grief, anger, or regret become available for present engagement. The burden of carrying an unintegrated past lightens, creating space for new possibilities. Seneca advised, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." Similarly, a mind fixated on unreconciled past events cannot fully engage with present opportunities. Shadow integration creates freedom from this fixation without denying history's influence. Sign 8. Expanded empathy and compassion. A beautiful manifestation of shadow integration is the development of genuine empathy and compassion, not as moral imperatives, but as natural outgrowths of psychological wholeness. When we accept our own complexity and darkness, we can extend that acceptance to others. Jung observed, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." This applies both to self-acceptance and to our approach to others. As we integrate our shadow, our judgment of others naturally softens. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, emphasized this compassionate perspective. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, but I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Signs of this expanded empathy include decreased moral superiority or self-righteousness, ability to understand perspectives far from your own, compassion that doesn't deny responsibility but holds it alongside understanding, less need to categorize people as good or bad, recognition of universal human struggles beneath surface differences. Consider someone who has integrated shadow aspects around failure. Having accepted their own mistakes and limitations, they can extend genuine compassion to others who fail without either harsh judgment or enabling excuses. They might think, I understand how they ended up here, and I trust they can find a better way forward. Epictetus taught this perspective. When you see a person weeping in grief, don't hesitate to sympathize with him, and even, if the occasion arises, to groan with him. Be careful, though, not to groan inwardly. This balanced empathy, connecting without being overwhelmed, becomes possible through shadow integration. The energetic shift here is from contraction to expansion. When shadow dominates, we must maintain psychological barriers between ourselves and others' unacceptable qualities. Integration dissolves these barriers, allowing genuine connection without fear of contamination by what others represent. This compassion doesn't mean abandoning discernment or boundaries. Rather, it means holding others' humanity alongside their actions, seeing the whole person rather than reducing them to their behavior or to projections of our shadow. Sign 9. Humor and lightness about the self. A surprising yet reliable indicator of shadow integration is the development of genuine humor and lightness about oneself. The ability to laugh at your own patterns without either self-deprecation or defensive posturing. Jung noted the importance of this quality. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Humor creates space for such transformative encounters with ourselves and others. When the shadow dominates, we often take ourselves extremely seriously. Our identity feels fragile, requiring constant defense. Integration brings psychological flexibility, the ability to hold our identities more lightly while maintaining authenticity. The Stoics valued this perspective. Epictetus advised, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone. This self-aware humor reflects integration rather than defensiveness. Signs of this humor and lightness include ability to laugh at your own psychological patterns, decreased defensiveness when foibles are pointed out, willingness to acknowledge mistakes without shame, playfulness about aspects of yourself previously considered serious, less identification with a fixed self-image. Consider someone who has integrated shadow aspects around perfectionism. Rather than either rigidly maintaining standards or rejecting them entirely, they might joke about their color-coded planning system, while continuing to use it when helpful. This lightness comes from seeing the pattern without being defined by it. Seneca wrote, "He who laughs at himself never runs out of things to laugh at." This self-directed humor becomes possible as shadow integration creates psychological distance between the observing self and the patterns being observed. The energy transformation here is from constriction to flow. When we take ourselves too seriously, enormous energy goes into maintaining our self-image. Humor releases this constriction, allowing more spontaneous and joyful engagement with life. Marcus Aurelius captured this lightness. Pass through this brief life as you would wish to have done when you come to die. When a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, and is prepared to face the consequences, he has every right to be content. This contentment includes the ability to smile at our own humanity. Sign 10. Cyclical integration rather than linear perfection. A mature sign of shadow integration is the recognition that the process is cyclical rather than linear, that integration occurs in layers and spirals rather than as a one-time achievement. This perspective prevents both complacency and discouragement. Jung described individuation as a lifelong process, There's no linear evolution. There's only a circumambulation of the self. The shadow doesn't disappear. Rather, our relationship with it transforms. New layers continually emerge as consciousness expands. The Stoics similarly embraced ongoing practice rather than permanent attainment. Epictetus advised, if you have assumed a character above your strength, you have both acted in this matter in an unbecoming way, and you have neglected that which you might have fulfilled. This suggests realistic self-assessment and continuous growth rather than perfection. Signs of this cyclical understanding include recognition of recurring patterns at deeper levels, less surprise or shame when shadow material resurfaces, ability to navigate integration processes more skillfully over time, balance between effort and acceptance, patience with the natural rhythm of psychological development. Consider someone working with shadow aspects around vulnerability. They might notice, I've become comfortable being emotionally open with friends, but I still armor up in professional settings. That's my next edge to explore. This recognition comes without self-judgment, acknowledging the natural layering of the process. Marcus Aurelius embodied this perspective, writing daily reminders to himself about ongoing practice. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, but I have seen that the nature of good is what is right, and the nature of evil what is wrong. And I have reflected that the nature of the offender himself is akin to my own. The energy shift here is from striving to flowing. When we expect linear perfection, we exhaust ourselves through impossible standards. Recognizing the cyclical nature of integration allows sustainable engagement with our depths. Seneca advised, let us be satisfied with what we have been given. And let's not even think there's anything better. The best income is a frugal spirit. This contentment with process rather than perfection creates psychological sustainability. The energy of integration, from fragmentation to wholeness. Having explored the signs of shadow integration, let's examine the fundamental energy transformation that occurs when the shadow no longer dominates. This shift can be understood as movement from fragmentation toward wholeness, what Jung called individuation. When the shadow dominates, psychological energy becomes trapped in several ways, maintaining barriers between conscious and unconscious material, projecting disowned qualities onto others, managing anxiety about potential exposure, compensating for perceived deficiencies, navigating conflicts between persona and shadow. These energy drains often manifest as chronic fatigue, diminished creativity, relationship difficulties, reduced presence, and a persistent sense of inauthenticity. The person feels, at some level, that they are not fully living their truth. The Stoics recognized similar energy depletion. Seneca observed, it is not the man who is too little who is poor, but the one who hankers after more. This hankering includes the unconscious longing for the disowned parts of ourselves. As integration progresses, energy previously consumed by internal division becomes available for conscious direction. This liberation creates several noticeable shifts: increased physical vitality as tension releases, greater creative flow as the full self participates, more authentic relationships requiring less management, enhanced presence in daily activities, a sense of inner alignment and coherence. Jung described this transformation. In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. Integration reveals this underlying order, allowing energy to flow naturally rather than being diverted into management of fragmentation. Marcus Aurelius captured the essence of this integration. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Constantly give yourself this retreat and renew yourself. This renewal becomes possible as internal conflicts resolve through integration. Practical steps toward shadow integration. While recognizing the signs of integration is valuable, you might wonder how to actively participate in this process. Here are practical approaches combining Jungian psychology with Stoic practices. 1. Cultivate conscious awareness. Jung emphasized consciousness as the foundation of integration. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Stoic practice. Daily self-examination. Seneca advised, when the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. Modern application. Keep a shadow journal documenting triggers, dreams, and patterns. Ask yourself, what qualities in others consistently trigger strong reactions in me? What aspects of myself do I work hardest to conceal or control? 2. Practice radical honesty. Integration requires truthfulness with oneself. Jung noted, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. Stoic practice. Premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. Marcus Aurelius practiced imagining difficulties to reduce their power. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. Modern application. Identify personal forbidden thoughts or qualities you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. Explore them in writing or with a trusted friend or therapist. Ask, what would it mean if this were true about me? What am I protecting by rejecting this? 3. Engage with dreams and imagination. Jung considered dreams royal roads to the unconscious. The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. Stoic practice. While the Stoics didn't emphasize dream work, they valued rational examination of impressions. Epictetus taught, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, you are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be. Modern application. Keep a dream journal. Look for recurring themes or figures that might represent shadow aspects. Practice active imagination by dialoguing with dream figures or aspects of yourself in writing. Develop the observing self. Integration requires psychological distance. The ability to observe yourself without immediately identifying with thoughts or emotions. Stoic practice. The discipline of assent. Choosing how to respond to impressions. Epictetus advised, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, you are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be. Modern application. Meditation practices that cultivate awareness of thoughts and emotions without attachment. When triggered, practice naming experiences. I notice anger arising rather than I am angry. 5. Seek feedback and external perspective. Others often see our shadow more clearly than we do. Jung noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Stoic practice. Valuing truthful friendship. Seneca wrote, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. Modern application. Ask trusted friends what patterns they notice in you, particularly during stress. Consider therapy with a practitioner familiar with depth psychology. Pay attention when multiple people give you similar feedback. 6. Take responsibility without shame. Integration requires owning shadow aspects without collapsing into shame. Jung distinguished between guilt about actions and shame about being. Stoic practice. Focus on what is within your control. Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Modern application. When shadow material emerges, practice self-compassion while taking responsibility. Recognize that having shadow aspects is universal human experience, not personal failing. 7. Express shadow material constructively. Integration requires channels for expression that neither suppress nor indulge shadow energies. Stoic practice. Virtue as expression of nature. Marcus Aurelius advised, a man's true delight is to do the things he was made for. Modern application. Find constructive outlets for shadow energies. Creative arts, physical activities, appropriate assertion, conscious sexuality, or purposeful work that channels formerly disowned qualities. 8. Integrate body wisdom. Shadow material often stores in the body as tension or disconnection. Jung recognized the body's role in psychological wholeness. Stoic practice. Recognition of body as part of nature. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, observe what your physical nature requires, as one subject to that alone, and do it, and accept it if your nature as a living being is not harmed thereby. Modern application. Practices like yoga, tai chi, authentic movement, or somatic experiencing that connect body awareness with psychological integration. Notice where you hold tension and what emotions arise as you release it. Trigger recognition. When strong reactions arise, pause to ask, what might this reveal about my shadow? Practice Epictetus's discipline of assent, choosing how to respond to impressions. Projection withdrawal. When judging others, consider, how might I embody what I'm seeing in them? This doesn't mean abandoning discernment, but recognizing personal material in your reactions. Paradox embracing. Notice either slash or thinking and experiment with both slash and perspectives. Practice holding seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously. Evening integration. 15 to 20 minutes. Reflection. Review the day's experiences, noting shadow material that emerged. As Seneca advised, when the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said. Journaling. Document insights, patterns, and questions that arose. Pay particular attention to recurring triggers or projections. Expression. Find appropriate channels for shadow energies, perhaps through creative work, physical movement, or conscious dialogue. Compassion. Close with self-compassion for the ongoing journey. As Jung noted, there can be no transforming of darkness into light and of apathy into movement without emotion. Periodic, deep practices. Dream work. Dedicate time to recording and reflecting on dreams, which Jung considered direct communications from the unconscious. Shadow dialogue. Practice active imagination through written dialogue with shadow aspects, allowing them voice without immediate identification. Feedback sessions. Periodically seek honest feedback from trusted others about blind spots or patterns they observe in you. Retreat time. Create space for deeper integration through periodic retreats or extended contemplative practice. The ongoing journey. Shadow integration as life practice. As we conclude this exploration, let's remember that shadow integration is not a destination, but an ongoing journey, one that continually deepens as consciousness expands. Jung described this process. There is no linear evolution. There's only a circumambulation of the self. This circumambulation, walking around and around the mystery at the center, creates an expanding spiral of awareness. Each circuit reveals new terrain, new shadow material to integrate, and new capacities for consciousness. The Stoics similarly viewed philosophical practice as lifelong commitment rather than achievement. Seneca advised, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. This humility before the task acknowledges both its difficulty and its worthiness. The signs we've explored: decreased reactivity, recognition without identification, projection withdrawal, embracing paradox, authentic expression, transmutation of shadow energy, reconciliation with the past, expanded empathy, humor about oneself, and recognition of cyclical integration, are not permanent achievements, but recurring insights that deepen over time. Through this ongoing practice, we participate in what Jung called the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. Similarly, the Stoics might recognize this journey as fulfilling our nature as rational beings capable of virtue. In the modern context, with all its challenges and opportunities, this ancient wisdom remains profoundly relevant. The integration of shadow aspects, those disowned parts of ourselves, creates not only personal wholeness, but contributes to collective healing. As you continue your own journey of shadow integration, remember that the darkness you fear holds gifts you need. In the words of Jung, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. May this exploration serve your ongoing integration, bringing greater vitality, authenticity, and compassion to your life and to our shared world. The shadow, once faced with courage and consciousness, becomes not an enemy, but an ally in the journey toward wholeness. Epilogue: the unified self. Beyond the psychological benefits and philosophical alignments of shadow integration lies perhaps its greatest gift, the experience of unified selfhood. When the shadow no longer dominates our energy, we begin to experience ourselves not as fragmented parts in conflict, but as a coherent whole encompassing all our aspects. Jung described this unification through the concept of the self, with a capital S, the organizing center of a psyche that transcends, yet includes the ego. This self represents not perfection, but completeness, the integration of conscious and unconscious elements into a functional whole. The Stoics approach this unity through their concept of homologia, living in agreement with oneself and with nature. Epictetus taught, freedom is secured not by the fulfilling of desires, but by the removal of desire. This removal doesn't mean suppression, but transcendence, finding the deeper unity beneath apparent contradictions. This unified experience manifests as internal coherence rather than fragmentation, natural flow rather than forced effort, present engagement rather than dissociation, spontaneous wisdom rather than calculated response, genuine connection beyond projection, creative expression of unique potential. Consider this unity like an orchestra that has been practicing separately finally playing in harmony. The instrument's aspects of self don't disappear but contribute to a symphonic whole greater than any individual part. Marcus Aurelius captured this harmony. Everything is interwoven, and the web is holy. Shadow integration reveals the threads connecting all aspects of ourselves, transforming apparent opposites into complementary elements of a greater pattern. This unified selfhood doesn't eliminate life's difficulties, but transforms our relationship with them. Challenges become opportunities for growth rather than threats to identity. Relationships become explorations rather than compensations. Work becomes expression rather than validation. As your journey of shadow integration continues, may you increasingly experience this unified selfhood, not as distant ideal, but as your birthright as a human being. In the words of Jung, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The awakened self, integrated, authentic, and whole, represents the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from life's complexities, but freedom to engage them fully, with all of your being. This is the promise and the invitation of shadow integration. About the author. Insert author biography or qualifications related to Jungian psychology, Stoic philosophy, and personal growth. Include relevant educational background, professional experience, and other works if applicable.